Families have used trusts for centuries to protect their wealth and maintain its value for the benefit of future generations. While many people have heard of trusts, most struggle to understand exactly what they are and the benefits they can bring. In this 444, I'm running through the 5 factors you need to understand before deciding to set up a trust, and they are: what is a trust, what assets are going to the trust, who is going to benefit from the trust, what type of trust is best, and who is going to administer the trust. Right, let's dive into trusts. In order for a trust to be created, there needs to be 3 certainties, and they are: certainty of intention. It must be certain that the settlor, and that's the person who is actually given away the assets that will be held inside the trust, actually intends to create a trust. There must also be certainty of property. It must be certain what property is to be placed inside the trust. And finally, there must be certainty of objects. It must be certain who can benefit from the trust property. Now, practically speaking, the trust needs 4 things. Firstly, it needs proof that it is the settlor's intention to create a trust. This is typically a written document, and if the trust is to be made in the settlor's lifetime to take immediate effect, then it's usually evidenced by a trust deed and often referred to as a settlement. If the settlor intends to create the trust on or shortly after their death, then the trust rules must be set out in the settlor's will and would be known as a will trust. Whether created by lifetime settlement or by a will, the trust document, certainty of intention, states what the gifted assets actually are, certainty of property, who is able to benefit from the trust, the beneficiaries, certainty of objects, and who is responsible for looking after them. These people or corporations are the trustees and are the legal owners of the trust assets. Secondly, the settlor will need to decide on what assets they are placing into the trust. A trust is the formal transfer of assets such as property, buildings, paintings, land, etc., shares and investments, or simply cash, to a small group of trustees with instructions that they hold the assets for the benefit of others, the beneficiaries. Thirdly, the trustees are the legal owners of the assets that have been settled into the trust, so the settlor will need to decide who they would like to act as trustees. The settlor can appoint themselves as a trustee, so they can exert some sort of control over those assets, but it is not advisable for a settlor to include themselves as a beneficiary. HMRC have rules in place that enable them to look through a trust if the settlor has both gifted an asset and is still able to benefit from it. This essentially nullifies the trust. It's advisable for a settlor to appoint at least 2 trustees. People die, people retire, and people become unwell. A trustee must be over the age of 18, of sound mind, and not an undischarged bankrupt or have unspent criminal convictions. It's possible to appoint a corporation to be a trustee. Finally, the trustees own the trust property on behalf of the beneficiaries, so deciding on the beneficiaries is essential. These can be named individuals or classes of individuals, for example, my spouse or my children. Whether specific people are named as beneficiaries or classes of beneficiaries are nominated impacts the type of trust created, which in turn impacts the tax treatment of that trust. Now, this is a complex area and outside the scope of this video, but you should take legal advice before settling assets into a trust to ensure the trust is helping you achieve exactly what you want. Most solicitors firms are set up to deal with this sort of trust work. The separation of legal ownership and beneficial ownership, which were once inseparable when the settlor owned the assets, is the unique characteristic of the trust concept. The trustees are the legal owners of the trust assets, but the beneficial owners are the beneficiaries. So understanding what you're hoping to achieve with a trust is essential. In my experience, there's no silver bullet when it comes to trusts. There is no trust solution that solves all problems without creating at least a few new ones. So be very clear about why you want to give away your assets into a trust. Now, one reason might be because your estate would otherwise face an inheritance tax bill if you still own the assets when you die, but you still want to exert some element of control over those assets. Another may be that you simply wish to ensure that others, such as your children, can benefit from the assets now, but don't become part of their personal financial landscape, perhaps to protect the assets from poor financial decision making or becoming part of a financial settlement if they were to get divorced. Once you've thought about why you want to give the assets away, it will help clarify whether a trust is indeed the best option for you. Often there can be alternative options with similar outcomes that don't have the administrative burdens and tax liabilities associated with trusts. It's important to remember that once assets are transferred into a trust, it's generally the case that the settlor cannot benefit from those assets again. This is often to ensure that the establishment of the trust is advantageous to you from a tax perspective. Therefore, it's important to ensure that you do not need access to these assets once you have given them away. Trusts can be in place for up to 125 years if they are non-charitable. While it's often the case that more modern trusts don't last this long, in reality, you should think about who you would want to benefit from the assets if they remain in the trust for a longer period of time. For example, your grandchildren, wider family members, or charity. Trustees will also need to register the trust with HMRC, prepare accounts, and file tax returns for the trust, as well as hold trustee meetings and otherwise ensure the ongoing administration and safeguarding of the trust's assets is managed. Speaking to a solicitor, accountant, and financial planner prior to setting up a trust will leave you in no doubt as to the pros and cons of using a trust for your particular situation. They may well suggest alternative solutions that you hadn't thought of. But once you're happy that a trust is the right thing to do, it's time for the 4 decisions you will face. Identify the assets you want to give away. This could be cash, property, or even shares in a business. It's important to appreciate the different tax implications of transferring these different types of assets into a trust, as this may influence what assets and the value of the assets you wish to put into the trust. It's also a good idea to consider if you'd like to benefit charitable causes. A charitable trust can be an extremely effective way of ring-fencing assets for the exclusive benefit of charitable causes close to your heart. There may be tax advantages too if a trust is set up for these purposes. Decide what type of trust is most suitable for the beneficiaries. There are several different types of trusts to choose from, and each of them affords the trustees and beneficiaries different responsibilities or rights respectively. Each one is treated differently for tax purposes, so it's important to select the right one for your particular situation. Decide who will act as trustees and safeguard the assets. This could be you, a spouse or civil partner, or it could also be other family members or close friends. It's worth noting that professionals can also act as trustees. It's also important to think about whether you expect your trustees to seek legal and tax advice to assist them in administering the trust. If so, then you'll need to consider ensuring there's sufficient liquid assets in the trust to meet the costs of obtaining the advice. Your trustees are not obliged to use their own personal funds to meet these costs. If the settlor is a trustee and they pay the fees on the trust's behalf, then they will in effect be adding to the trust fund each time they contribute to the fees. This can come with additional tax liabilities depending on the type of trust. Finally, it is possible to use a trust to safeguard assets for disabled people or compensation payouts from personal injury or medical negligence compensation. But it's important you seek this advice as soon as possible. These trusts can be tax efficient and an extremely effective way of ring fencing assets for a beneficiary so it doesn't impact on their entitlement to certain state benefits. Always seek professional advice if you are thinking about setting up. Now, we're looking to grow this channel, so it would be great if you could hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.